Number 1. Aaria Murphy. On Valentine's Day, 2022, 16-year-old Aaria Murphy and two other masked teenagers quietly made their way across the grass of an upscale Miramar neighborhood. Their target was a lone resident sitting alone in a dimly lit gazebo, absorbed in his phone and completely unaware that three masked figures were closing in. Dressed in dark hoodies and gloves to conceal their identities, the group walked straight up to him. One of them pulled out a handgun and demanded his phone and backpack. For a few seconds, it looked like the robbery was over before it had even begun. But they had badly misjudged the person they had chosen to target. The incident happened inside the upscale Silver Shores gated community along the 15600 block of Silver Shores Boulevard in Miramar, Florida. It was exactly 9:30 that night when the confrontation began, but it had been building for nearly half an hour. The resident sat alone in a neighborhood gazebo, watching YouTube videos on his phone, confident the community's security gates made it a safe place to unwind. Unbeknownst to him, the three masked teenagers had been moving through the area since around 9 o'clock, slipping between bushes, crouching in the grass, and waiting for the right moment to strike. 16-year-old Aaria Murphy was a well-known varsity football player at Everglades High School. He had no criminal record and no known history of violence. Yet on this night, he joined two masked accomplices in an armed robbery. As they closed in on the gazebo, one of them pointed a loaded handgun at the resident and demanded his phone and backpack. They expected the lone victim to freeze and hand everything over. But what the teenagers didn't know was that the resident was a licensed concealed carry holder. The moment he realized his life was in danger, he reached for his handgun and fired. In an instant, the robbery fell apart. The three teenagers turned and ran, but they didn't make it far. One of the rounds struck 16-year-old Aaria Murphy in the back of the head, causing him to collapse in the grass. Realizing the robbery had gone horribly wrong, the other two fled on foot, leaving Murphy behind as they disappeared into the darkness. Within minutes, Miramar police officers and paramedics flooded the neighborhood. Murphy was airlifted to Memorial Regional Hospital in critical condition, but his injuries were too severe to overcome. He died at the hospital a short time later. Detectives from the Miramar Police Department quickly launched an investigation, working alongside the Broward State Attorney's Office to determine whether the resident's actions were legally justified. After reviewing the evidence, prosecutors concluded that he had been confronted by multiple masked, armed suspects and had acted in lawful self-defense. No charges were filed against the resident, with authorities ruling that the shooting was justified under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. The consequences for the two surviving teenagers were serious. After police released surveillance footage of the robbery to local news stations, 17-year-old Jonavan Campos and 16-year-old Anthony Person turned themselves in. Both were taken into custody and charged with armed robbery in connection with the fatal Valentine's Day attack. During the investigation, crime scene technicians recovered a loaded handgun from the grass near where Murphy had collapsed. However, later testing found no fingerprints linking the weapon directly to him. This suggested that Murphy may not have been the teenager holding the gun during the robbery. Even so, he had taken part in an armed ambush alongside the other two, and the decision ended with him losing his life. Number 2. Levanti Broadbent. It was around 10:30 on the night of Friday, July 31st, 2015, when a 23-year-old man and his girlfriend reached the end of a scenic trail at Shadow Falls Park in St. Paul. They stopped to take in the view, completely unaware that 16-year-old Levanti Broadbent and two masked accomplices were emerging from the woods behind them. Within seconds, the teenagers surrounded the couple. Broadbent pointed a loaded handgun at the man's chest and demanded their valuables. They expected the couple to hand everything over without a fight. They were wrong. The overlook above the Mississippi River near Summit Avenue was supposed to be a quiet place for an evening walk and a chance to catch a glimpse of the rare blue moon. Instead, it became the scene of an attempted armed robbery. The 23-year-old man wasn't the defenseless victim the teenagers believed he was. He was legally carrying a concealed handgun, and when one of the teenagers pointed a gun at him, he had only seconds to react. But the story didn't begin there. According to investigators, the attempted robbery was the latest in a string of crimes allegedly carried out by the same group of teenagers over the previous several days. The group's crime spree began the day before, on July 30th, when 16-year-old Dante Foster stole a silver sedan from an alley behind a St. Paul home. What the owner didn't know was that 2 loaded Smith & Wesson handguns were still inside the vehicle. Armed with these stolen weapons, the teenagers spent the next 24 hours driving around the Twin Cities looking for victims to rob. By 4:40 on the morning of July 31st, Broadbent, Foster, and their friends, including 16-year-old Kendall Lewis and 17-year-old Malcolm Golden, pulled off an armed robbery at a bus stop on the city's east side. Broadbent, wearing a face mask and holding one of the stolen pistols, forced a man to hand over his wallet, phone, and ATM card, netting just $20. As Friday night rolled around, the crew decided to hunt for more targets near the wealthy River District. Foster parked the stolen sedan on a nearby residential street, while Broadbent, Lewis, and Golden pulled heavy masks over their faces and slipped into the unlit trails. Spotting the man and woman standing alone near the cliff edge, Broadbent turned to his friends and said, "Let's stain them," before rushing out from the trees. To catch the victims off guard, one of the teenagers first approached the couple, casually asking to borrow a cell phone to call his mother. The moment the victims were distracted, Broadbent stepped forward, raised the loaded handgun, and pointed it directly at the man's chest from just 3 feet away, demanding he empty his pockets. The teenagers believed the gun would be enough to force the couple into handing everything over. The teenagers expected another easy robbery. Instead, everything changed within seconds. As Broadbent held the gun on the man, the victim drew his own handgun and opened fire, firing 5 or 6 shots. Broadbent was hit multiple times in the upper torso and collapsed to the ground. The gunfire sent the rest of the group running. Lewis and Foster raced back to the stolen car and sped away, while Golden fled through the park on foot. The man immediately tried to save Broadbent's life. He took off his shirt and pressed it against the teenager's gunshot wounds, while the woman frantically called 911. By the time St. Paul police officers and paramedics arrived at the overlook, they found the shooter still trying to stop the bleeding. Despite their efforts, Broadbent's injuries were too severe. He was pronounced dead at the scene. St. Paul homicide detectives quickly began piecing together what had happened. The following day, officers stopped the stolen silver sedan and took Kendall Lewis into custody. Inside the vehicle, investigators recovered one of the stolen Smith & Wesson handguns, along with property stolen during the bus stop robbery. As detectives followed additional leads, including social media posts and interviews with the teenagers, they identified and arrested the remaining members of the group, including Dante Foster and Malcolm Golden. Number 3. Darius Smith. 15-year-old Darius Smith and 2 masked accomplices waited in the shadows along East Colorado Boulevard on the evening of Friday, May 26, 2017. Around 8:13 p.m., they spotted a man who had just stepped off a Metro Gold Line train and began following him down the sidewalk. The man had no idea he was being watched. Moments later, the 3 teenagers rushed him from behind. They repeatedly punched him in the head before Darius Smith pulled out what appeared to be a semi-automatic handgun and pointed it directly at the man's face. The teenagers expected another quick robbery. They couldn't have been more wrong. The teenagers had originally been heading down the Metro Gold Line to attend the Monrovia Street Fair that night, but their plans changed when they noticed a man riding the Metro Gold Line alone. What they didn't know was that the man was an off-duty U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer assigned to San Francisco International Airport. He was wearing earbuds, listening to music, and carrying extra bags, making him look like a completely distracted, easy mark. The moment the teenagers attacked him from behind and began striking him in the head, the agent made a split-second decision. Outnumbered 3-1 and staring down what appeared to be a real Glock handgun, he drew his service weapon and fired 7 rounds in self-defense. Everything happened within seconds. The 14-year-old accomplice was shot twice and collapsed onto the asphalt, where the officer kept him at gunpoint until responding officers arrived. The uninjured 15-year-old fled into the surrounding neighborhood. Despite being struck 4 times, twice in the upper body and twice in the buttocks, Darius Smith managed to run about a block and a half before collapsing in a street gutter. A nearby resident, Sergio Carmona, heard 4 or 5 rapid gunshots and ran outside to see what had happened. He found Smith lying in the street, bleeding heavily. Carmona immediately took off his shirt and pressed it against the teenager's wounds before taking his hand to keep him awake. When Carmona asked where he had been shot, Smith weakly pointed to his abdomen, back, and shoulder. Struggling to breathe, he whispered, "It hurts. I can't breathe. I feel like I'm going to pass out." Carmona held his hand tightly and urged him to stay conscious until help arrived. Responding officers arrived within minutes and recovered the weapon Smith had dropped nearby. It was an all-metal BB gun made to closely resemble a real handgun. Without the legally required orange safety tip, it was virtually impossible to distinguish from a genuine firearm in the dark. Smith was rushed to the hospital, where he died from his injuries at 5:34 the following morning. In the days that followed, the shooting sparked intense public scrutiny. Attorneys representing Smith's family publicly accused the federal agent of executing the teenager, alleging that he first shot Smith in the legs, then stood over him and fired 3 more rounds into his chest. But the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department said the evidence told a very different story. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from the Metro Gold Line, nearby businesses, and residential security cameras. Together, the videos showed that the officer never chased Smith or stood over him. Instead, he remained at the original scene, keeping the 14-year-old accomplice at gunpoint until responding officers arrived. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office officially cleared the off-duty agent of all criminal liability, ruling the shooting a clear-cut case of justifiable self-defense. The 2 surviving teenagers were subsequently charged in juvenile court with attempted robbery and assault with a deadly weapon. Number 4. Jamart Hixon. On March 30th, 2019, 14-year-old Jamart Hixon and a 16-year-old accomplice targeted a parked car on a dark residential street in Lehigh Acres, Florida. Earlier that week, they had arranged an online marketplace transaction with the 2 men inside. But instead of showing up to buy the item, the teenagers arrived armed with loaded handguns, hiding in the darkness until the right moment to strike. As they rushed the vehicle, Hixon walked up to the driver's side window and pointed his gun at the occupants, demanding the tactical bulletproof vest they had come to steal. The teenagers expected another easy robbery. They had no idea what was coming. The 5500 block of 4th Street West in Lehigh Acres was supposed to be the meeting place for a routine offer-up sale. 2 men had listed a tactical ballistic vest on the marketplace app, and after arranging a late-night meeting with a buyer, they drove to the quiet residential street, expecting a quick sale and an easy drive home. What they didn't know was that the person messaging them wasn't a legitimate buyer. It was a 14-year-old who never intended to pay for the vest. For the teenagers, the plan seemed simple. Marketplace apps made it easy to lure unsuspecting buyers and sellers to a location of their choosing. Armed with loaded handguns, Hixon and his 16-year-old accomplice hid in the darkness along 4th Street West, waiting for the sellers to arrive. At approximately 10:18 p.m., the car pulled up and came to a stop. Seconds later, the teenagers rushed in. Hixon didn't pretend to be the buyer. He walked straight to the driver's side window, pointed a loaded handgun at the driver from just inches away, and demanded the tactical ballistic vest along with the men's valuables. The teenagers expected the sudden ambush to leave the 2 men with no choice but to hand everything over. What the teenagers didn't know was that the driver wasn't an easy target. He was legally armed and refused to surrender his life to someone pointing a gun through his window. As Hixon leaned toward the vehicle, the driver drew his concealed handgun and fired in self-defense. In an instant, the encounter turned into a close-range gunfight. Multiple shots were fired as the 2 sides exchanged gunfire. Hixon was hit several times and collapsed beside the driver's door. During the exchange, the passenger inside the vehicle was struck in the leg, but survived the injury. The 16-year-old accomplice turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness as the gunfire ended. Realizing his passenger had been shot, the driver pulled away from the scene and called 911 to report the attempted robbery, the shooting, and his passenger's injury. Lee County Sheriff's deputies and paramedics arrived within minutes, but there was nothing they could do for Jamart Hixon. The 14-year-old was pronounced dead at the scene. Detectives with the Lee County Sheriff's Office quickly began investigating the shooting. Crime scene investigators collected the firearms, documented the damage to the vehicle, and recovered the offer-up messages that had led the victims to the meeting spot. Those messages revealed exactly what had happened. The teenagers had used the Marketplace app to lure the sellers to the 5500 block of 4th Street West, intending to rob them at gunpoint. After reviewing the evidence, the state attorney's office determined that the driver had acted in lawful self-defense and declined to file any criminal charges against him. The surviving 16-year-old faced the full weight of the investigation. Because Hixon was killed during the commission of an armed robbery the two had planned together, prosecutors charged the teenager as an adult with felony murder and armed robbery under Florida law. Number 5. Armon Preswood. 16-year-old Armon Preswood had been reported missing from Indianapolis for more than a month when he resurfaced in the early hours of August 3, 2022. At around 4:15 that morning, he and an armed accomplice approached a car parked in the driveway of a home on Tapp Drive. A man and a woman were sitting inside. Believing they had found an easy target, the teenagers closed in on the vehicle. One of them yanked open the driver's door, while the other pointed a handgun at the couple. They expected the victims to hand over their belongings without a fight, but this wasn't the easy robbery they thought it would be. The 11,000 block of Tapp Drive, just off North Cumberland Road and East 10th Street on Indianapolis's far east side, was quiet in the early hours of the morning. A car was parked in the driveway of one of the homes, where a homeowner's daughter and her boyfriend sat talking, unaware that two armed teenagers were walking toward them. Armon Preswood had been listed as a missing runaway in the Indiana Missing Person Bulletin since June 30th, 2022. That morning, he and his accomplice were looking for an easy target. Their plan was simple: find a parked vehicle, catch the occupants by surprise, and rob them at gunpoint. The teenagers didn't hesitate. One of them pulled open the driver's door while the other pointed a handgun at the couple inside. They demanded money, phones, and anything else of value. The teenagers thought the couple was defenseless. They were about to find out otherwise. The woman's boyfriend didn't panic. With a gun pointed at him from just outside the driver's door, he knew he had only seconds to react. Under Indiana law, a person may use deadly force when they reasonably believe it is necessary to prevent serious bodily injury or the commission of a forcible felony. The teenagers had only just begun the robbery when the boyfriend drew his handgun and fired in self-defense. Preswood was struck multiple times and collapsed in the driveway beside the open car door. His accomplice immediately turned and ran, disappearing into the neighborhood on foot. The couple immediately called 911 to report the attempted robbery and the shooting. Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department officers and paramedics arrived within minutes. Despite their efforts to save him, Armon Preswood was pronounced dead at the scene. Homicide detectives with the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department processed the scene, collected evidence, and interviewed the couple. The man cooperated with investigators, turned over his handgun for testing, and gave a statement describing what had happened. After reviewing the evidence, the Marion County Prosecutor's Office determined that the shooting was lawful self-defense. No charges were filed against him. Number 6. Jordell Richardson. On the afternoon of June 1st, 2023, 14-year-old Jordell Richardson walked into a West Aurora convenience store to pull off an armed robbery. He cinched his hoodie tight, flashed the heavy metal frame of a handgun at the clerk, and grabbed an armful of vape cartridges. But as Jordell ran back outside, he had no idea he was heading straight into a trap. An alert gang unit sergeant had already spotted the masked group and radioed for backup. Worse still, the accomplices who sent Jordell inside had given him a $30 pellet gun made to look like a real handgun. It was just after noon near East 8th Avenue and North Dayton Street in West Aurora. The shopping plaza was quiet when a group of 5 teenagers walked by wearing heavy hooded sweatshirts, face masks, and gloves, despite the 80-degree heat. The unusual clothing immediately caught the attention of an Aurora Police Gang unit sergeant patrolling the area. Sergeant Stevenson Carey, a member of the Aurora Police Gang unit, was patrolling the area when he noticed the group heading toward the shopping plaza. Their heavy clothing and face coverings on a hot summer afternoon immediately raised his suspicions. Believing they were about to commit a crime, he radioed for backup and asked nearby officers to respond. As officers began moving into position, the teenagers approached a convenience store. What they didn't realize was that police were already watching them. Parked in an alley behind the building was a stolen Kia Sedona the group planned to use as a getaway vehicle. Inside the store, 14-year-old Jordell Richardson walked up to the counter. He lifted his sweatshirt just enough to reveal what looked like a black handgun tucked into his waistband. Believing it was real, the clerk didn't resist. Jordell grabbed a handful of vape cartridges, and the teenagers hurried out of the store. The teenagers believed they had gotten away with the robbery. They were wrong. As they ran from the store, Officers Rach Gruszeczka and James Snap arrived at the shopping plaza. Officer Snap spotted one of the teenagers running down a nearby alley and gave chase. It was Jordell Richardson. Jordell ran deeper into the alley, but Officer Snap caught up to him and tackled the 14-year-old to the ground. Moments later, Officer Gruszeczka arrived to help take him into custody. As the two officers worked to restrain Jordell on the ground, the encounter took a terrifying turn. During the struggle, Officer Gruszeczka spotted what appeared to be a handgun tucked into Jordell's waistband, pinned between the teenager and the officers. Officer Gruszeczka ordered Jordell to let go of the weapon. As the struggle continued, he later reported feeling Jordell's hand tighten around the gun beneath them. Believing Jordell was about to pull the weapon free, Officer Gruszeczka fired a single round into the teenager's abdomen. Immediately after firing, Officer Gruszeczka reached into the teenager's waistband, pulled the handgun free, and tossed it several feet away across the pavement to neutralize the threat. As he lay on the pavement, the 14-year-old pleaded with the officers. His final words, captured on police body-worn cameras, were, "I'm sorry, I'm done. Help me. Take me to the hospital. I can't breathe." The officers immediately began providing first aid, performing CPR until paramedics arrived. Jordell was taken to a nearby hospital, but despite their efforts, he died from his injuries a short time later. As investigators processed the scene, they examined the weapon Officer Gruszeczka had pulled from Jordell's waistband. It was an all-metal Heckler & Koch airsoft pellet gun with a removable magazine. Without the orange safety tip typically found on replica guns, it closely resembled a real semi-automatic handgun in both appearance and weight. In the middle of a violent struggle, neither the officers nor the store clerk had any way of knowing it wasn't real. The shooting drew widespread attention across Aurora and quickly became the subject of intense public debate. The 18th Judicial District Critical Incident Response Team launched an investigation, reviewing surveillance footage from the store, police radio traffic, forensic evidence, and body camera footage from the officers involved. On September 6, 2023, District Attorney John Kellner announced that Officer Gruszeczka would not face criminal charges. Investigators concluded that, at the moment he fired, the officer reasonably believed Jordell was reaching for what appeared to be a real handgun during the struggle. Under Colorado law, that met the legal standard for the use of deadly force. A separate internal affairs investigation later found that the officers had acted within department policy. The two other 14-year-olds involved in the robbery were later arrested and charged through the juvenile court system. Number 7. Junior Lenuza Gutierrez. On the night of Tuesday, November 12, 2019, just before 10:30 p.m., 16-year-old Junior Lenuza Gutierrez and 4 older associates pulled into the parking lot of a business along Indian Trail, Lilburn Road, in Lilburn, Georgia. They had arrived in a gray Nissan Altima to meet 20-year-old Emmanuel Antigua Paulino, who believed he was completing a routine cell phone sale arranged through an online marketplace. Instead of bringing money, the group planned to rob him. As soon as Paulino stepped out of his vehicle, they rushed him. The teenagers expected the robbery to be over in seconds. They didn't know the encounter was about to end very differently. Emmanuel Paulino was already waiting in the parking lot, expecting to complete the cell phone sale. Instead, 5 young men approached his vehicle. They were 16-year-old Junior Lenuza Gutierrez, 17-year-old Kevin Gallardo, 18-year-old Anthony Esquero, 20-year-old Harry Richardson, and 20-year-old Eric Vargas. Outnumbered 5-1, Paulino was quickly overwhelmed. Several members of the group, some reportedly emerging from nearby bushes, rushed him and violently attacked him before taking the phone. With the robbery over, the 5 suspects ran back to the gray Nissan Altima and tried to flee. But as the car began pulling away, Paulino ran to his own vehicle, grabbed a handgun, and fired 3 shots at the fleeing Nissan. Although Paulino was firing at a moving vehicle in the dark, one of his 3 shots struck the Nissan Altima. The bullet passed through 16-year-old junior Lenuza Gutierrez before hitting 20-year-old Eric Vargas. Both were critically wounded. Instead of driving straight to a hospital, the surviving occupants pulled over along Indian Trail Lilburn Road and called 911. They told dispatchers they had been the victims of a road rage shooting while driving northbound on Interstate 85, hoping to hide what had really happened. Emergency responders rushed to the scene and transported both gunshot victims to a nearby hospital. 16-year-old junior Lenuza Gutierrez was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. 20-year-old Eric Vargas remained in critical condition in intensive care. Gwinnett County detectives immediately launched an investigation. As they reviewed the evidence, they found multiple inconsistencies in the survivors' statements. The claim that the group had been caught in a road rage shooting on Interstate 85 began to fall apart as investigators traced the shooting back to the parking lot where the robbery had taken place. On November 13th, police arrested the 3 uninjured accomplices: 20-year-old Harry Richardson, 18-year-old Anthony Esquero, and 17-year-old Kevin Gallardo. All 3 were charged with criminal attempt to commit robbery and felony murder. Under Georgia law, anyone who takes part in certain dangerous felonies can be held responsible for a death that occurs during the crime, even if the person killed is one of their own accomplices. Prosecutors argued that because the shooting happened during the robbery, the surviving participants were legally responsible for the deaths. On November 14th, 20-year-old Eric Vargas died from his injuries at the hospital, bringing the death toll to 2. The following evening, on Friday, November 15th, Gwinnett County detectives arrested 20-year-old Emmanuel Antigua Paulino at his home in Lilburn. He was charged with 2 counts of felony murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault. During a preliminary hearing on December 20th, 2019, Paulino's attorney, Jay Apt, argued that his client had acted in self-defense. According to the defense, someone inside the fleeing Nissan Altima pointed a firearm at Paulino moments before he opened fire. However, Detective Diego Galasso testified that surveillance footage and physical evidence showed the Nissan Altima was already fleeing when Paulino fired the 3 shots. Prosecutors argued that, under Georgia law, the immediate threat had ended by that point. The judge denied Paulino bond. The case also left the families with sharply different views of what had happened. Junior Lenuza Gutierrez's stepfather, Carlos Romero, told local media that the 16-year-old was not involved in the robbery and had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time with an older group. Investigators, however, concluded that all 5 men had taken part in planning and carrying out the robbery. Number 8. Edgar Espino. Around 1 o'clock on the morning of Sunday, July 8, 2018, 16-year-old Edgar Espino and 17-year-old Ivory Dwayne Tatum III made their way to a second-story apartment at the Oaks of Louisville Apartments in North Texas. Believing they had found an easy target, they waited for someone inside to answer the door. As soon as it opened, the pair stepped into the apartment expecting little or no resistance. They were wrong. Seconds later, they heard the sound of a shotgun being racked. The robbery was about to spiral out of control. The Oaks of Louisville Apartments sits in the 200 block of Oak Knoll Circle in Louisville, Texas, just northwest of Dallas. At 1 o'clock that Sunday morning, most of Denton County was asleep, but 16-year-old Edgar Espino and his 17-year-old accomplice, Ivory Dwayne Tatum III, were walking through the apartment complex toward an occupied second-floor unit. The 2 teenagers walked up to the apartment and reached the front door. Investigators later determined there were no signs of forced entry. Somehow, the door was opened, giving the pair the opportunity to step inside. Believing they had caught the resident off guard, Edgar and Ivory crossed the threshold expecting an easy robbery. They assumed whoever lived there would panic and hand over whatever they wanted. They were dead wrong. Realizing 2 intruders had entered his apartment, the resident grabbed a shotgun and fired a single round. The blast struck 16-year-old Edgar Espino, critically wounding him. What the teenagers believed would be a quick home invasion was over within seconds. As Edgar Espino collapsed to the floor, 17-year-old Ivory Dwayne Tatum III suffered minor injuries during the confrontation. Before he could escape, the resident kept his shotgun trained on Tatum and held him at gunpoint inside the apartment until police arrived. Someone inside the apartment called 911, and Louisville police officers were dispatched to the Oaks of Louisville apartments. When they reached the second-floor unit, they found the resident holding 17-year-old Ivory Dwayne Tatum III at gunpoint, while 16-year-old Edgar Espino lay on the floor, suffering from a gunshot wound. Louisville Fire Department paramedics responded alongside the officers. Despite their efforts, Edgar Espino was pronounced dead at the scene. Tatum, who suffered minor injuries during the confrontation, was treated before being taken to a local hospital for further evaluation. Later that morning, Louisville Police Department spokesman Captain Kendall Lynn confirmed the details of the incident to local media. After receiving treatment for his injuries, 17-year-old Ivory Dwayne Tatum III was taken to the Louisville City Jail and booked into custody. Number 9. Jaylen Thompson. Shortly before 1 o'clock on the morning of Monday, September 12, 2016, 16-year-old Jaylen Thompson Johnson arrived at the Auburn Apartments in DeKalb County, Georgia. Armed with a handgun and wearing a mask, the Hillside High School sophomore targeted an occupied apartment, expecting the resident inside to be an easy victim. Instead, he came face to face with an armed homeowner. Within seconds, this late-night home invasion turned into a deadly gunfight that backfired in the worst way imaginable. The Auburn Apartments on East Woodcroft Parkway in Durham, North Carolina, was a quiet residential complex where violent crime was rare. But shortly after midnight on Monday, September 12, 2016, 16-year-old Jaylen Thompson Johnson arrived there with a very different purpose. Instead of being home before school the next morning, the Hillside High School sophomore was armed with a handgun, wearing a mask, and heading toward an occupied apartment. At approximately 12:45 that morning, Jaylen walked up to a second-story apartment. Rather than targeting an empty unit, he chose an occupied home, expecting his mask, his handgun, and the element of surprise to overwhelm whoever was inside. Jaylen forced his way through the front door, shattering the quiet of the apartment. The resident woke to the sound of the break-in, but instead of surrendering, he grabbed his own firearm and prepared to defend himself. As Jaylen stepped inside, both men opened fire. During the gunfight, the resident suffered a gunshot wound to the leg. Despite being injured, he managed to return fire, hitting Jaylen multiple times. The 16-year-old collapsed near the apartment entrance, bringing the confrontation to an end. At 12:48 that morning, the wounded resident called 911 and reported the shooting. Bleeding heavily from the gunshot wound to his leg, the resident stayed on the phone with the Durham police dispatcher. He calmly explained what had happened, telling the dispatcher, "I shot the suspect when he tried to enter my house." The dispatcher instructed him to remain as calm as possible and apply pressure to the wound, while police officers and paramedics rushed to the apartment. Officers with the Durham Police Department arrived at the apartment alongside EMS crews. After securing the scene, they found 16-year-old Jaylen Thompson Johnson lying unresponsive just inside the apartment. Paramedics examined him, but there was nothing they could do. Jaylen was pronounced dead at the scene. Paramedics treated the resident at the scene before taking him to a nearby hospital. Doctors treated the gunshot wound to his leg, and because the injury wasn't life-threatening, he was later released and made a full recovery. By 2 o'clock that morning, lead investigator Jay Barr and Durham police crime scene technicians had sealed off the apartment. For the next several hours, homicide detectives carefully processed the scene, collecting shell casings, documenting the evidence, and recovering the mask and handgun Jaylen had brought with him. As word spread across Durham later that morning, students at Hillside High School were stunned to learn that the 16-year-old killed during the overnight break-in was one of their own classmates. After the shooting, Durham police investigators reviewed the evidence alongside North Carolina law. Under the state's Castle Doctrine, a person inside their home is generally presumed to have a reasonable fear of death or serious bodily harm if someone unlawfully and forcibly enters the residence. Investigators concluded that Jaylen Thompson Johnson had forced his way into the apartment while armed and wearing a mask. During the confrontation, the resident was shot in the leg before returning fire. Based on the evidence and the protections provided under North Carolina's Castle Doctrine, the shooting was ruled a justified act of self-defense. The resident was never charged with a crime. Number 10. DaVon Jones. Just before 11:30 on the morning of Friday, June 24th, 2022, DaVon Jones climbed into the passenger seat of a black Cadillac SUV in the Stonefield Manor subdivision of Harris County, Texas. The 16-year-old was meeting a 17-year-old former classmate and his mother for what was supposed to be a routine marijuana deal. But within moments, everything fell apart. DaVon grabbed a yellow bag containing cash and marijuana, jumped out of the SUV, and ran through the quiet neighborhood. He believed he'd gotten away with it. What he didn't realize was that his former friend had already stepped out of the vehicle with a loaded handgun and had no intention of letting him escape. To the residents living in Stonefield Manor, Friday mornings were typically calm. But on June 24th, 2022, 39-year-old Yvonne Hinojosa was driving through the neighborhood with her 17-year-old son, Tyler Marshall. They were headed to meet 16-year-old DaVon Jones, one of Tyler's former classmates, for a planned marijuana deal. When DaVon climbed into the SUV, the meeting took an unexpected turn. Instead of completing the deal, he suddenly demanded their belongings. He then grabbed a yellow bag containing cash and marijuana before jumping out of the vehicle. With the yellow bag in his hands, DaVon jumped out of the SUV and sprinted down the street. His cell phone slipped from his hand and crashed onto the pavement as he ran. Moments later, he shouted back toward the SUV that they could have their belongings back. He dropped the yellow bag, hoping it would end the confrontation, and kept running toward a nearby yard. Inside the Cadillac, Tyler Marshall didn't call the police or simply let the theft go. Instead, he pulled out a handgun and stepped out of the passenger seat. Horrified by what she was witnessing, his mother screamed, asking why he had done it. Ignoring her pleas, 17-year-old Tyler Marshall pointed the gun at the fleeing teenager and fired a single shot. The bullet struck 16-year-old DaVon Jones in the left side of his torso, passing through his heart and lung. Despite the devastating wound, he managed to run a short distance before collapsing in a nearby yard. Instead of calling 911 or checking on the wounded teenager, Tyler Marshall walked over, picked up the yellow bag containing the cash and marijuana, got back into his mother's Cadillac SUV, and told her to drive away. At 11:26 that morning, Yvonne Hinojosa called 911 and reported that her son had been involved in an attempted robbery and may have shot someone. Harris County Sheriff's Office deputies and paramedics responded to the scene. They found 16-year-old DaVon Jones lying unresponsive in a backyard nearby. Despite their efforts, he was pronounced dead at the scene. Crime scene investigators carefully examined the area. They found no weapon on or near 16-year-old DaVon Jones, nor anywhere along the route he had taken as he fled. Homicide detectives later interviewed Tyler Marshall. He claimed he fired in self-defense, saying he believed DaVon was reaching for a weapon as he ran away. But investigators found no evidence to support that account. The physical evidence, witness statements, and the autopsy all indicated that DaVon was unarmed and had been shot while fleeing. Medical examiners determined the bullet entered through the side and back of his torso. In April 2023, a Harris County grand jury indicted 39-year-old Yvonne Hinojosa for her role as the getaway driver under Texas party liability law. In December 2025, 17-year-old Tyler Marshall stood trial in Harris County. Prosecutors argued that the evidence showed DaVon Jones was unarmed, retreating, and trying to give back the stolen bag when Marshall shot him. The defense maintained that Marshall believed DaVon was reaching for a weapon and acted in self-defense. The jury rejected that argument. Tyler Marshall was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 40 years in state prison. He was also ordered to pay a $10,000 fine. Every single one of these cases proves the exact same point. The moment a teenager pulls a weapon, they lose all control of what happens next. A split-second decision to rob someone can instantly turn into a fatal encounter, leaving families destroyed and lives ended before they even really begin. If you want to support the channel and see more deep dives into verified true crime cases, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.